to the WorkJoy Jam podcast. I'm your host, Beth Stallwood, and in this episode, I am joined by the wonderful Helen Hill of Unlikely Genius and author of the new book, Falling Off the Ladder. Helen has an incredibly tough story, actually, one of work gloom at the worst end of it. And she talks to me about how she managed to transition from being in that place to being a thriving freelance, independent designer, content designer, author, and how that journey can really be challenging, but also helping people find their joy. So amazing story, one that is difficult actually in places, and I'm really grateful to Helen for being really open and honest about some of the tough stuff rather than just seeing the outcomes and the great things. And that's a real theme of her book, is how to transition. So I really liked talking to Helen. Such an interesting conversation. I hope you enjoy it too. Welcome to the WorkJoy Jam. I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Helen Hill, to the podcast this week. And I am really keen to have this conversation. But before I introduce Helen, I'm going to get Helen to introduce herself, because you know way more about you than I do. And we would love to hear a bit about you, Helen, your background, your story, and kind of how you got to where you are today. So over to you.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me on. It probably is wise I introduce myself, because I struggle to explain my journey, never mind other people. And I regularly get people, what is it you do? So, so I worked as a graphic designer. That was what I was trained in from university, graphic design and advertising. And I took a very squiggly career from that point. I went into lecturing graphic design, and then as a teaching assistant in a primary. Then I went to the other end and did secondary, where I was like literacy intervention and developing e-learning in the school with iPads that didn't really work very well. And from there, I ended up getting asked if I would consider a job in an e-learning company as a designer. So while we were there, we realised that I was good at the writing and I understood learning and things. So I ended up doing the full end-to-end process of the writing, the design, and then the book build and the coding and all that side of things. But during all this time, I didn't have a great experience working for others. Partly, I think I'm just not the personality for it, but also I was diagnosed with 2 chronic health conditions and was then discriminated against, and there was very little understanding of it because it was one of these invisible illnesses. So my mental health took a massive slide. I ended up with anxiety, depression, having panic attacks daily in the toilets and getting told I was unprofessional for it. So eventually handed in my notice and turned what was my little side business, just doing a few logos here and there, into Unlikely Genius, which is now full-time self-employment for me. So I've been doing that for just over 3 years, since September 2018. And to be honest, my feet hit the ground running and I haven't stopped since.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been a real journey, but in the space of just sort of, less than 2 years, I had totally turned my life around from, like I say, these health conditions and my mental health being absolutely rock bottom to thriving in my own business, getting really visible, getting lots of work in, and I've even now put a book together about this journey to help others do the same. So I've just released that this year, which was like a lifetime ambition for me to have a book.
Amazing.
So that's...
I mean, it's a lot in 3 minutes. There was a lot to go through. I've got so many things that I'm going to pick out and talk about, because what a career journey. And I think it's really interesting hearing, when people come on the podcast, hearing their career journeys, because so many people think that the careers are linear and it's like you go from this to this to this, but going from graphic design to teaching to e-learning to now running your own business and being employed and then not employed, it's such a fascinating journey that actually a lot of people have these squiggly interesting careers because different things happen over time. So what I'd really interested, if I can pick out a few and then we'll move on from this, is because I want to talk about the book and I want to talk about all the other stuff as well, is how do you go from like graphic design to teaching? Like that's an interesting move, isn't it? It's not necessarily the standard path.
Yeah, and I think right from the off, I felt really odd in that industry. I wasn't one of these arrogant types that was all about, look at me and stuff. And I felt really out of place. So I just ended up in like little job in a printer's, and I just never quite felt right. So when someone approached me about doing a PGCE, which I became a lecturer in graphic design, so I kind of saw
Yeah.
that as still in the industry a bit, but taking a bit of a sideways step. And I loved my first couple of years in that, but then went to a college which was not so great, very cliquey. I was definitely the outcast there, and that was where I was there when I got diagnosed with the
Yeah.
MS, and that was where a lot of the problems started because
Mm.
the initial reaction was, "Well, you can't teach anymore." Then it was a really ignorant response. That
Yeah.
um, so yeah, it was a bit of a, I think I was trying to see it as a bit of an escape route, and my mum warned me because my mum had been a teacher all her life, it was not gonna be the I should have listened to her, it was not gonna be the fix, but,
Oh. How many things in our lives do we think, "Oh, I probably should have listened to my parents on that
yes.
one?"
Yeah,
You only ever
definitely.
see it in reverse though, not in going forwards, do you?
No, no, definitely not, no. Yeah, so they all seem to make sense, and I think the thing is that I've always just kept myself open to opportunities and
Yeah.
got very excited about things that have come up, but then yeah, it's not necessarily worked out. It's not fixed what were the underlying problems.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I ended up where I am, which to be fair, it brought all those random skills together. It was really
Yeah.
unusual, odd how, I'd been a designer, I'd been a writer, I'd worked in developing technology and literacy and all these things, and then suddenly it was like, oh yeah, they do fit together in a way that I never imagined.
Yeah. And that's interesting, isn't it? As well, actually pulling all the pieces of the jigsaw together and suddenly you go, oh, actually, this could be something. It's
Mm.
not, I always think you don't have to look at it as separate things. They are part of the same. You just haven't kind of worked out the connections yet.
Yeah, and the thing that's worked really well for me and why I've got so much work is because I do the massive mixture of skills.
Yeah.
Because most people will do the writing or the build or the design. And once a customer realizes that they can have one person to do it all instead of three freelancers, that's a win-win, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
And it speeds up the process and all the rest of it. So it's worked really well for me.
Brilliant. I'm so glad to hear that you've got into the thriving zone because,
Yeah.
I talk about workjoy, but the opposite of workjoy I call work gloom. And it
Mm.
sounds like you were in a terrible position
Oh,
with
hugely. Yeah.
discrimination, and with not feeling like you're welcome or valued or fitting in. And I always think there's different levels of work gloom. So there's the like work gloom, which is, oh, I'm a bit miserable today, but I'll snap out of it when something good happens because actually this is just real life.
Yeah.
And there's always some good and some bad and everything. There's never complete joy. It just isn't possible. Yet what you're talking about there is the more acute and chronic thing of actually this workplace is not for me, it's not valuing me, it doesn't understand me, it's not working for me. And I always talk about the fact that if you're in that zone, you've got to do something about that because as you've experienced there horribly, and I'm so sorry you had to go through this, like the impact on your health and mental health is awful.
Oh yeah. It's phenomenal. I mean, when I look back to 3 years ago, well, 3 and a bit years ago, and think how I had to, well, I'd for the start start off with, I'd sit on the edge of the bed crying every morning because I didn't want to go in. Then I had an hour's drive where I was falling asleep at the wheel. I was that exhausted from dealing with it all. And I'd get to work and it'd take me 20 minutes to get myself through that door because I knew I was going to be facing and whatever battle it was that would be thrown at me that day, whatever snarky comment, and it was, yeah, it did become absolutely, it was not a way to live, and it made my health worse, which meant I was off more, which then I was being dragged into meetings because I was on this Bradford factor even though I shouldn't have been because I had a disability. And yeah, it's a massive cycle, and the incredible thing has been that at that point I must have had a hospital appointment every week, either because of my back, because of the MS, because of anxiety, whatever it was. And that was such a drain, and I always made the time up, more than, in fact. But now, 3 years on, I go to the hospital once every 6 to 12 months. And
Wow.
that's the difference it has made of being able to work at home, control my work hours and my work day, and, just have that flexibility to look after myself. And I don't do that very well now. But, self care goes out the window sometimes. But Yeah, I mean, what a change that is to go from weekly
Mm.
hospital visits to every 6 months, if that.
Yeah. And that just shows really, doesn't it, the impact that it can have in both directions. So
Yeah.
being in a workplace that is not good for you
Mm.
versus being, well, even if you were in a workplace that was good for you or working for yourself, I don't think I mean, obviously the working for yourself works for you,
Yeah.
but for other people, getting out of that situation and moving into a workplace that has respect for you, that understands things like disability, that's
Mm.
able to be inclusive in that way. And I think it's a really, I'm going to dive into this one for a little bit and then we're going to head off into some other bits. But this question about the inclusion of people with disabilities at work is a big one and it's a challenging one. And
Mm.
unfortunately, it's one that organizations often get wrong, as in your case.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the problem is now that, like, I don't think I will ever go back because I've seen that in more than one workplace as
Yeah,
well. So, I mean, teaching was very unforgiving anyway, because obviously if you're taking an appointment out in the middle of the day, that's your lesson time, and they have a real issue with that. So I was told I couldn't take appointments during term. I had to do it during half term and things like that. And that doesn't allow you the flex. I couldn't just make sure that I got an appointment in that week's half term. That wasn't how it worked. I had to have when you've waited 18 months for an appointment, you don't want to put it back another 8 weeks
no,
either.
no.
So yeah, I mean, I think the workplace is generally, I think there's a lot of room to be made now and a lot of progress that needs to be made for people with any kind of health conditions, and not just health, just for people that have families. You see all these women that have to quit their jobs and go freelance because they can't have the flexibility for picking
Yeah,
their kids up and things like that. And I do think that's one good thing that's come out of the pandemic, that there's more flexibility now and more realization that people can work from home and things. But yeah, my bugbear is the companies that say they support, diversity, disability, inclusion, all these things, but it's lip service, and
yeah.
they are absolutely not.
It's
That's
not the same as like the nice thing on the website to the experience within the
no,
organization. Yeah.
yeah,
So obviously in a terrible place work wise,
yeah,
health wise, emotion wise, like I just sit here and like want to give the person sitting on the edge of the bed a big hug and say, right, let's sort this out.
yeah,
Obviously you found a way through it, and I know it's a big theme of yours with the book as to how you can kind of get yourself through these challenging situations.
yeah,
So can we dive in here for a little bit? Can you talk to me about, because if people have hit, like, I'd call it like rock bottom gloom, this is
yeah.
I know I cannot stay here, it is not good for me, it's not good for my health, and we are just getting into this cycle of gloom. How did you, at that place, when you are not feeling well, when you're struggling so much, how did you get yourself out of it and into this positive, wonderful world you are in now?
Yeah, it was a funny one because it wasn't planned, and people had said to me for a long time, "Why don't you work for yourself?" But like I say, my business was just this little thing that was earning me the odd 50 quid on the side, and I thought, well, I can't make a living out of that. But it got to the point where I basically had a meltdown in the office, and got myself signed off sick for a couple of weeks. And while I was off, I got a letter from the company that I really don't think I should have got. They should have been leaving me alone while I was off sick. And it was the last straw for me. So I just handed my notice in with no idea where I was going, what I was going to do. And although I was at rock bottom, as soon as I handed that notice in, I sat on the settee in the kitchen just in tears of relief that I
Right.
was just out of that place. And it was a real journey. I luckily was contacted 2 days later about a contracting role, and I'd never even thought of doing that. I'd done bits of freelance, but I'd never thought of doing a big contract role, and I
Mm.
didn't really know anything about it. So this guy taught me through the whole process, and anyway, I got the job on the spot. So then, I had the rest of my sick leave as my notice period, and then literally as that was up, started on this contract the next day. And it was a really good stepping stone. It was difficult because I was in a room with people that were getting paid up to £1,000 a day, who were the experts in their field. They were confident men. It was a very male dominated environment. And I came in feeling rock bottom, really wobbly, feeling like an absolute imposter, but on this great rate in a contract that I never imagined myself doing. And it was a bit of a whirlwind. But because it was one where I had to go into the premises, but I worked for myself, it was that good stepping stone to then working for myself full time at home. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I had my difficulties there. There was one person in particular that seemed to sense my vulnerability and probe quite a lot when I was not strong enough to deal with that. She could tell something was wrong and would ask me very personal questions and things. And it would just, the walls would come down and I would get upset. So after 10 months, I left there, went on holiday to Norway, and it just happened that a recruiter I was connected to put out a call saying, is anyone free for a contract starting in 2 weeks? I put my hand up. I had an interview the next day while on the Norwegian fjords with Elton John playing a concert at the castle in the background.
You can't make this stuff up.
I know. And my fella sat on the balcony with a beer pretending he wasn't listening into this interview. And yeah, I got offered the job on the spot while I was in Norway. So I came back and started the next day. So it was all very like wham, bam, bam. But at the same time, I had worked on my visibility leading up to that because I was obviously in a bad place.
Yeah.
And knew I wanted out, didn't know what I was going to do, but I'd started, really trying to get my visibility a bit up on LinkedIn and connect to people and think about what I could do, connect to recruiters. So it just managed to align, and, I had a portfolio ready and all that kind of thing. So although I wasn't planned in what I was going to do, a lot of the legwork was in place for me to just go, I'm off, I'm out of here. And
yeah. So you had some of the foundations ready to happen. And it's really interesting because a lot of people think that when people start their own businesses, it's been in the plans for years and you've been secretly every weekend working on it. And sometimes it happens almost, as you're saying, like it wasn't completely accidental. You kind of had the thoughts, but it happened because of the situation.
Yeah.
And the situation actually has led you to where you are today with everything. But the question I had in my mind as you were talking through this is where you are, and I often work with people when I'm coaching them around this, is when you have been in a situation like you were in, where there was a horrible working environment, where there was discrimination, where things happened that shouldn't have happened. And often people struggle with a real lack of confidence after that, and really struggle with actually understanding your value. And I'd love to explore with you, how did you build yourself back up through the kind of following years to be able to, as you sit here today, really confident in your business, what you're doing, you're adding value from a place of being under the kind of I'm not feeling confident about it.
Yeah, it was something that I think a lot of it was sort of almost subconscious that I worked on, because I really love all the stuff to do with the mind and mindfulness and neural pathways and things like that. So I'm really intrigued in that. And I'd done quite a bit on mindfulness in the past, and I'd had CBT sessions where it had really highlighted to me that I was a very black and white thinker and a catastrophizer. And that had been in the past, but it suddenly dawned on me that that was me. But I would say one of the biggest things for me was being allowed to be myself. So in this work environment, I'd been told you will never succeed being you and being as you are and being yourself. And, that's just a sloth and bunny loving plonker who runs around and a clumsy sod and all these things that it just wasn't appreciated. It was not robotic enough and it was not corporate enough. And when I went solo, a huge dawning realization was that I could now be myself, and the pressure that took off me of not having to put this act on. And I'd been told to get myself in the mindset of someone that was like the company darling, and I had to do that every day and try and get in. It was like acting for 8 hours a day.
Yeah. And that's just exhausting. At the very least. I mean, it's a horrible thing to have to do, but even just the physical exhaustion of having to pretend all the time is awful.
Yeah, and second guess every move you and every conversation you have and every sentence you say, and that's not a way to live. And I think that, like I said, that was a huge thing for me, and it is something I talk about a lot in the book. But I think I just really had to take that time while I was in that first contract to really look at what had happened and really sit with it and think, why had that happened? Was it just my personality? Am I a bad person? Am I not? And talk to other people. And I started to realize that a lot of people had similar experiences, so it wasn't just me. And there were other people in the company having the same experiences at the time, and I did know that. But then, like and this is why I've structured the book in the way I have, that the first section is all about dealing with where you were and the emotions that came with it and what you were told and led to believe about the corporate world and how you had to behave and who you had to be. Because we're told to sit at a desk 9 to 5 and eat your lunch at this time and do this and do that and dress this way and that. And that's not a good environment for me. I think I got to the point where I was standing up for myself quite a lot, which is definitely not appreciated. And I needed the flexibility, but they wouldn't give it me.
Yeah.
So I think you've got to really sit and look at the problem and realise that it's not you. Sometimes there's just a misalignment with that world and you. It doesn't mean you're broken. And that was a huge point for me of realising, actually, there is a place for me. That just wasn't it. And once I'd started to realise that, I could start to look at my thinking patterns and dealing with the emotions and start looking at my triggers, start recognising those early signs that I was getting in a bit of a hole again. All those things that come, like I say, with things like therapy, and I was having therapy at the time as well. So that helped. But yeah, it's a long journey, and people say to me now, like, "Oh, you're everywhere and you're doing so well," and and it's like, yeah, but it's been a heck of a journey. It's not just these 3 years. It's been the 12,
Yeah.
14 years in employment before that as well.
Yeah. And that is a really interesting point. I'm going to go and dig into the book again in a minute because I think it's really interesting. But I think that is an interesting point, is that people see the outcome of your journey, not the journey and the struggle. So what they're seeing is, in the last 3 years, that you've built a business, you've written a book, you're doing amazing things, you're working with great clients, you've kind of found your niche, you found your tribe, you're in a great place.
Yeah.
They haven't seen the 15 years of struggle before that and the stuff that went wrong, and they didn't see you sat on the edge of your bed crying about it, and they didn't see you like trying to go into work and really finding it hard. They don't see that. So and that's one of the reasons also for like the podcasts and that we do here, is actually there's real life behind these things, and nothing happens in an easy way. You have like worked really blooming hard at it through some really, really challenging situations. So I think it's worth us all, every time we see people, and it's the kind of Instagram version of life, isn't it? We see the nice, the shiny, the filtered version of reality, and we think that's people's full reality.
Yeah.
And that is just
1%. If that, it's 1% of their life.
And it's 1%, and it's only the good bits, and it's very filtered, and it's not the real thing of what happens. So we're all for sharing stories about the real life stuff, and the things that don't bring us joy, in the understanding that by actually sharing some of these things, we might help right today. So Helen, you sharing your story about going through this and having a disability and a health condition and not being supported might help somebody who listens to this, who's in a similar situation, speak up or do something about it sooner. It might help a leader who's got someone in their team to be more flexible. So that's the reason, is to help people to find it. So I totally love that you're sharing it. It's amazing that you are. And I know it also must be quite hard to share some of this stuff, right?
Yeah, I think particularly at first it was very difficult. I kind of felt it would come back at me, or that people would just think I was whinging, or, because that was what I was told for a while. So you believe this stuff. But I just found the more I shared in the communities where I felt safe to talk about it, the reaction was that everyone has something going on, like you say. And people kept saying, I'm really glad you've said this because I've experienced this, this and this, or I'm struggling with this. And people start opening up to you. And I really don't agree with this whole robotic front that, corporate world insist you put on, and that people really struggle to shake off. And this was part of my reason for writing the book, that I could still see so many freelancers struggling with that. that they thought they had to be at their desk 9 to 5. They had to be professional at all times, as in sat in a suit and I don't know, all the little things that get expected, and putting your makeup on. I mean, I've sat here literally in 2 weeks because I've not been very well in my sloth pajamas with just a t-shirt and jumper on, and I've not been ashamed to say to my customers, "I'm here, but I'm in my sloth pajamas," and they'd be like, "Full credit to you, that's fine."
Yeah.
And
they're probably like, "Oh, I really wish I was in my sloth
yeah,
pajamas."
exactly.
And I always say to people on the podcast, we're not doing it on video so that you can come with no makeup and in your pajamas if you really want to. So I'm very, very happy for this to be the case. So are you happy for me to kind of dive in a little bit more to the book? So first of all, we've had this conversation. We haven't even told anyone what the book's called. So
No,
tell us a bit about the book.
So it's called Falling Off the Ladder, and it's about helping people move from being employed by others or the corporate world to now work for themselves and to thrive and make that mindset shift. I keep nearly swearing every time I say that. Make that shift to, like I've just been saying, about from the expectations of working for others and what we're told about how work should look and how it should be and how you should behave, to how you can actually, like I say, embrace yourself and be you and put it out there, and actually the response to it is phenomenal. So it's to help people go on that journey, written from my experience. I've created a framework of how I did it, but there's also 9 other people's stories in the book as well, and their full stories are on the website that's associated with the book, because it was really important to get different perspectives, not just mine in there. But we've all, there's similar themes to us all, even though we all had vastly different problems, from eating disorders to postnatal depression to, all different manner of things.
Yeah. And I love the title because I think it's brilliant. It's so appropriate for what we're talking about. And there are people I know who listen to the podcast, because I love hearing the stories of what people are telling me, who are either on that journey towards becoming self-employed, to doing freelancing, because that's where they found where their joy is. And it's a difficult transition. And I've done it myself, right? I was employed and I am no longer employed. And I think I am probably now completely unemployable.
Me too.
And I delight in that.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you definitely wouldn't want me to work for you. And there's, it is an interesting transition, because I think a lot of people end up doing it when they've done 10, 15, 20 years, even more, in either the corporate world or being employed by other people, whichever world it is that you've been working in.
Yeah.
Is that you almost, there's kind of like an institutionalization thing, isn't there?
Yeah.
Where you do become a little bit like, as long as I'm at my desk by this time, everything will be fine.
Yeah.
And I take my lunch then. And this is what I do every day. And there's a very much kind of a routine to work. And I know I reckon it took me 2 years after becoming self-employed to realize that,
me too.
I don't have to do it like that anymore.
No.
And when you have the realization, you're kind of like, why has it taken me so long to read? And the reason now clearly is I hadn't read your book.
Well, there is that, yes, but it wasn't around then, so
it wasn't.
So I'll let you off. But no, I was the same, and I think even when you have that realization, there's still those moments when you think you should be. And to be honest, some clients, you have to manage their expectations. Like I've got one at the moment that expects me to be available 9 till 6 for them, even though they took me on full-time work and are actually only giving me part-time and paying me for part-time, but they still expect me to be available at all these times that they're in the office. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way. You're hiring a freelancer. If you want that, you need to hire a member of staff.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I think as long as you explain to your customers the benefit for them of you working at the times that are good for you, then you can build a bit of an understanding. Because like I will work in the morning, I tend to trail off. Sometimes I will go to the gym in the late afternoon, and then I will work in the evening, because I get a sudden flurry again at like 6 o'clock, maybe even 9 o'clock at night. And I'm a total insomniac, so sometimes I'll be working at 2 or 3 in the morning. But that works for me. And if they make me sit at a desk from 9 till 5, they're not going to get much productivity out of me. So, you've got to explain that benefit to them, that this is why you work freelance, and that, if they're hiring a freelancer, they've got to be flexible with you as you are with them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and
yeah,
it's about that setting boundaries and
yeah,
expectations, isn't it? And actually, I suppose one of the big differences here is when you're a freelancer, it's a these are my terms. This is what I'm offering you,
yeah,
and if that's not what you need, then cool. Then maybe I'm not the right person for you.
yeah.
So yeah, I totally get
And
that.
I
And
think you've got to get that first couple of years under your belt till you're comfortable saying no, haven't you? And
oh yeah,
because like I've only started saying no in the last year, because otherwise, at first you take on anything and everything because you think, oh, well, and then a pandemic hits, and then you take on anything and everything again.
yeah,
Yeah. So, but I'm now at the point where I'm getting fussy, and I'm going to niche next year because
yeah.
I've realised that certain topics just don't interest me.
Mm.
So I will
You're able to
focus on the
kind
ones
of
that
funnel
do.
it down to the things that really work for you.
Yeah.
And I just want to come back to one of the points you make about um this thing about it doesn't mean you're broken because the workplace
Yeah.
wasn't right for you. And I like circled that like 12 times and highlighted it when you were saying it, because I think a lot of people, when they've been through a challenging situation at work, feel that it is their fault and it is because
Yeah.
they're broken.
Yeah.
And actually what you've discovered through your, I hate saying again, the journey that you've been on, sound like the expedition, the adventure you've been on,
Yeah.
sounds a bit more exciting, is that it's not you that's broken, it's that you're in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And when you can be yourself and are valued for being yourself. And I always say there is a little bit of being yourself, but with a filter, like a
Oh yeah.
professional filter applied. Because
Yeah.
people are like, no, you should bring your full self to work. I'm like, I'm not sure you want some of the bits, like the personal life Beth bits in your
Yeah.
workplace.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you want them. I'm not sure
No.
I want to bring them. I think there's some stuff that I want to leave at home. It's just for like home place and, for different people. So I do think there is a professional filter, but that's very different from having to change who you are and how you
Yeah.
are. And there's
Yeah.
something for me about helping workplaces to value that individuality. And I agree with you. I think maybe the pandemic will help us. Maybe, I
Yeah.
mean, long term, there's a big question. Will it help with more flexible working? Will it help with understanding that different people work differently? I mean, the whole idea of like a 9 to 5 is so archaic anyway.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
not based on any kind of real world, real
Yeah.
life anymore.
As is the thing of staying in a career for life. That's not a thing anymore. That was our parents' generation. And there's so many more jobs available now and opportunities to retrain, and a job for life is not the case anymore. And I think I was in that mindset for a while as well, that because I've done something at university, I have to stay in it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually, no, I really don't. And I mean, I've got 3 degrees now, and I'm still going back to do a slight deviation next year now of doing another qualification. And I only signed up for it last night.
Oh, hello. Hot off. Because I'm like a total nerd. I love a bit of learning. I'm like, what have you signed up for? Are you allowed to say, or is it secret squirrel?
Well, I can. I've been starting to tell people. So, I've signed up for a coaching qualification to
Oh,
start in February, because
brilliant.
obviously it aligns with the stuff that I've been writing about for the book, and I've been helping other people transition. And so I want to kind of formalise and actually make sure I've got the qualification, the skills to help people do it.
Amazing.
Um,
Well,
so
you know
yeah,
that I have trained as a coach. So if you ever need any help with any of your assignments and things you're doing,
yeah.
just give
Okay.
me a shout. I
Thank
love
you.
coaching is a great thing to be able to do.
Yeah,
Brilliant. How exciting. So the book, you've talked about what it is, who it's for. We've talked a little bit about the fact that it's got some other people's perspectives on it. And I'm
yeah,
loving this because we all have our own adventure that we've been on, which is great.
yeah.
But when you then link it to other people's, tell me a little bit about that experience of kind of gathering those stories of others and how that really influenced the models and things that you created.
Yeah, it was. Gosh, I went backwards and forwards with how to include them in the book. I really did, because initially I had them all as kind of separate, little features throughout, and then I thought, no, I actually want to embed them into the themes of the book and pull out, because each of the stories had a different theme in it and different highs and lows. And one person, it would be that they really needed to expand their boundaries, and another one, it was to do with the general environment and dealing, like I say, with things like eating disorders and stuff. So I went through their stories and really pulled out the bits that related to the chapters of the book to sort of explain and just show that it's not just you. If you are experiencing this issue or you need to work on this topic, all of us have had to as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was absolutely thrilled that the people that are involved in the book, and also all the interviews I've been doing on the website, fallingofftheladder.com, I've got feature leapers on there. They're all people that are just in my community that I've just said, do you want to be involved? And every single person has said yes. Yes, I want to share my story. Yes, I want to help others. And that's the nature of the freelance community. They're amazing. And yeah, it's been really humbling, to be honest. You know, all those people that have been involved, all the ones that got involved in the launch day, they all said yes outright as well. And it's been a phenomenal year. And because all these people have also been there for me in what's been a very difficult year. You know, I lost my dad and my grandma earlier this year, and it was a really difficult time, but it was the freelancers in my network that sent me cards and sent me little gifts and cake, massive box of cake and things like that kept me and my mum going for months.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's the world you're entering, where actually you'd think these people are your competition, and they're not. They are colleagues, they're friends. And I love that those people that are featured in the book are now, you know, they were already people I connected with, but now I've got a whole different level of connection with them.
Yeah. And in WorkJoy, we talk about it as like, you know, finding your squad, and whether
Yeah,
it's through a freelance community, through a network, through people that you work with, you know, family, friend, etc., is having that squad. And it was, I have to say, when I went freelance, and I imagine you're probably the same, and a lot of people are, one of the things I really worried about was being lonely.
yeah.
And I am a proper hardcore people person, extrovert, and the idea of sitting on my own for you know, my entire working day was it was the one thing I was petrified about, and I was like, I don't know if this is going to work.
No,
And I, like you, found such amazing people within the community, people that I work with, so trainers and facilitators and coaches, people development people, who, although we do very similar things, we're not in competition with each other, we're in
no.
support of each other. And that has been one of the best things. And it's almost like, why did I worry about this? But
Yeah.
I was genuinely worried about it.
But I know people who've been freelancing for 10 years who have not part of these communities. Like my book designer was like, what are these communities you mentioned? And she's now joined them. She's like, I didn't even know these existed. You know, and I think it takes, some of us take it for granted once we're in them and we find them
Yeah.
early on. But there are people out there feeling lonely that haven't discovered these communities. And you know, it's our job to, I think, keep spreading the word about them, and you know, get more people in and help others that are feeling lonely. But it's like the whole thing we were talking about before of making sure you share both sides of the story, isn't it? And
Yeah.
if people are feeling lonely, then you know, invite them in. And I mean, I was the same in that I thought I would go mental working from home. I seriously thought, in fact, my fella's first response was, "Oh gosh, this isn't going to be good," because because I'd always got really bad cabin fever. I
Yeah.
couldn't be in the house for more than 24 hours. But what we've realised is that was the old house, and we moved to this new one a year before I went solo. And actually, this house is much bigger. It means I've got an office instead of, like, in the old house, I would have had to have worked in the kitchen or the front room or something. And this house gives me the space to at least spread out, have my work a little bit separate, although I'm not very good at that still. Um, but yeah, the old house used to give me terrible cabin fever. You know, if by the end of the weekend we hadn't been out anywhere, I'd be like rocking in a corner, and I'd make him take me out. so, so
It's so
yeah,
funny because I had exactly the same thing. And even, you know, lockdown pandemic side of things, most of my work was with in people's offices. I'd go out and be with them, so I didn't freelance from home. I kind of went out and was with them. And then obviously lockdown happened, and I was doing everything from home, and I was like, this is gonna this is this. And at the end of a few weeks of like working from home, my laugh turned around to me and went, I'm quite impressed with you, actually.
yeah,
I'm actually doing all right, because I'm still connecting with people. We had moved out of London into the countryside just before lockdown, and I think being able to get outside and do things, like, I didn't feel I
yeah,
needed it as much. And because I had the community already developed, and it just helps. Have people around you, I think, is the big message, isn't it? It's like,
yeah,
find your squad, find the people who you can work with, support, value you value them. It's an amazing, amazing thing to have.
yeah,
I am gonna move us on, because we've
yeah.
been chatting for 8, and I honestly, we could talk for another 4 or 5 hours. I
We
think I
could,
would
we
love it.
could.
I'm not sure anyone would want to listen for another 4 or 5 hours though, so we've got to keep them in mind while we're on here.
Yeah,
Are you okay if we move on to some quick fire
yep,
questions?
of course, yep.
Fab. I'm going to add an extra one in to start
Oh,
with. And I know
oh.
this is a bit cheeky because I haven't asked you to think about this one. But I am writing the WorkJoy book at the moment.
Ah.
And I'm going to add the question in, which is, what is your top tip for writing a book?
Oh gosh, I've shared a bit. I keep changing my mind every time someone asks me this.
That's all right. I don't mind.
I would say get an editor and beta readers involved early on, because they
Yeah,
really helped me frame what the book should be and see the things that I couldn't see.
great.
Yeah.
I love that. I might be calling you to be one of my beta
Oh
readers,
yeah,
just
for
so you
sure.
know.
Do it.
Now,
Do it. I
now
love
you've heard
reading.
that.
So
Excellent, excellent. Like, you can be in my squad. You can be my
yes,
beta reader. I love it.
definitely.
Okay, on to the proper questions versus me
Yep.
asking you favors. We're in a time where you kind of have to say yes because you're on the podcast. So,
Oh no, any
is
excuse.
what is always guaranteed to bring you some work joy?
I think, other than being able to go and mither my bunnies at any hour of the day, now I work from home, I think it's when you see the penny drop in someone. So whatever you're working on with them, whether it is that you're mentoring someone or even just a client that I'm helping, totally reframe their whole training systems and things. It's that moment when a penny drops and they think, oh, yeah, this is really good. And they understand and they can see the benefit of something. I just really like that. I always used to like that with the students I worked with as well.
Yeah, yeah. That's a very kind of like trainer, teacher thing,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's like, oh, I've helped someone understand something. Yay, it
Yeah.
makes me feel good. Love it.
Yeah.
Um, this is an interesting one because obviously you've written the book.
Yep.
But what book are you currently reading?
Well, according to my Goodreads, I've got about 12 on the go.
Yeah.
But one of the main ones at the moment is Copywriting Is by Andrew Bolton. So I'm surrounded by copywriters in my network, and to the point where everyone seems to think I am one. Um, so yeah, it's a really interesting book for me to absorb a bit more of the writing
Oh,
knowledge.
cool.
Yeah,
I love that. I haven't heard of it, so I'll have to give that one
it's
a
a new one.
read.
It was out around the same time as mine, but yeah,
Oh,
really good. Andrew
brilliant.
Bolton.
What's the best or most useful bit of advice that someone has given you in your life that you always find yourself coming back to?
The one, I don't know whether it's advice as such, but people constantly said to me, "Why don't you work for yourself?" And like I say, I batted it off for so long, and even my dad kept saying it for a while. And funnily enough, it was the advice I should have listened to, and that now I'm like, yeah, actually, you're right.
Yeah, you were all right. It just wasn't the
Yeah,
right time, and now it is.
yeah,
I love that. And maybe there's something there about how do we notice what people notice in us quicker?
yeah,
So that
yeah,
whole they have seen the potential in it and maybe didn't explain it in the right way to get you excited about it, but people could see that this could be your journey for you.
yeah.
Love it. What is one, and maybe there's something from the book for this, but maybe not. What is your one super practical bit of advice to our listeners that's something that they could go and do now, tomorrow, the next day, that would bring them a bit more work joy, and why?
Mine, well, this is to do with communities. So don't just be in them, don't just loiter, engage in them, have conversations, make conversations, answer other people's questions. Just get yourself active in them. There's too many people that loiter on the edges and then say they don't get
Yeah,
anything from communities, but you've got to be active,
yeah.
and your support network's there once you do that.
Yeah, amazing. And I know from the communities I'm in, and obviously the Club WorkJoy community that we have, that the more you put into it, the more
Yeah,
you'll get out of it. You are not going to get the return on your investment if you just sit on the sidelines. It is
yeah,
a participation game. You've got to get in it
yeah,
to be in it.
definitely.
Amazing. So, Helen, thank you. Where can people find out more about you, your work, your book, everything Helen related?
So if you want to know about the book, go to fallingofftheladder.com, and there's all the links to my social media and my Medium account and all sorts on there. And you can also buy the book and courses and merchandise and all sorts on there as well. And it's the only
Oh, I
place
love a bit of merch.
yeah, oh yeah, it's the only place the colour versions of the book are available, and there's only about 30 something left. So yeah, get in quick if you want one of those. If you want to know more about the learning and content design, head to unlikely-genius.com. And again, that's got all my links to Instagram and Twitter and all sorts on there.
Amazing. We will put those links into the show notes and everything on
Yeah.
our website and on our socials so that people can link on straight through, buy the book, look at all of your amazing work. Helen,
It's a
thank
very
you.
pretty book.
It is beautiful. I love it. Thank you so much for being a guest on the WorkJoy Jam. It's been wonderful listening
Thank
to you, and
you.
I think a really great story of moving from some really serious work gloom to
Yeah.
finding like a world that really works for you and brings you the joy.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me. It's been
Amazing.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, a huge thank you to Helen Hill for being my guest on this episode of the WorkJoy Jam. For me, there's so many lessons and things that we could take away from here, but I wanted to pick out a couple that I'm really reflecting on. And the first one is, if you are in the position where it has gone beyond the usual work gloom that real life brings, you know, the moments, the things that annoy us, the things that we find frustrating, to where you're actually in a position where you are being discriminated against, or where you're finding it so challenging that it's affecting your health and affecting your mental health, then for me that's a reminder to us all, and it's something that's really core in the WorkJoy principles, is that's time to reach out, to get some help, to consider where you want to be, who you want to be working with, because that's not good. It's not the right place to be. That's the worst end of work gloom. So I think there's something for us all to help ourselves, or if we're seeing other people struggling in this way, as leaders, as people who want to help our friends or our family or our colleagues, let's help people move beyond that level of work gloom. It's not cool to be there. We don't want to be the people creating that. We don't want to encourage it. Some of the other points that are just really staying with me are around this idea that feeling that we're the ones who are broken, that if something has gone wrong in that relationship of work and us, if we're not feeling we can be ourselves, the impact that has on our ability to be great at our jobs is absolutely enormous. So my thing is always find a place where you are valued for being who you are. And I do talk about it in the episode, like we all have to have a professional filter at times, but there's a difference between filtering and completely changing who we are to fit a cultural mode that isn't right for us. And I also think, with thanks to Helen, thinking about this, how do we move beyond it and step beyond it and listen to other people's stories and the real power of the community? And it's one that I know so much. Obviously, Helen's community, she's talking about the freelance community, but there are so many different things, professional, personal communities we can get involved in. And as Helen says, you want to get involved in them and be in them. And it's one of the reasons I set up the Club WorkJoy, which you can find out more about on our website, clubworkjoy.com. And it's a community where we have events and networking and conversations all around the subject of work joy. So if you are interested, we love to have new members. It's a great place to be. There's some really great conversation support from the squad and the clubbers involved there. So thank you all for listening to the WorkJoy Jam. Do go and have a listen to our other episodes. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.